This is the Course of Action podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, and the Reeves Across America radio network. Watch every episode live on YouTube and check out the blog post on jeffclarkofficial.com. Welcome to Course of Action. Today is the start of a unique collaboration between myself and Ryan Steck, who you guys might know as the Real Book Spy. What we're going to do in the future is kind of still under wraps, but there's a lot to come. But what I want you to do is go to therealbookspy.com, follow along all the latest thriller news, sign up for the newsletter, and stay tuned because we got some awesome stuff coming. But now, enjoy Mark Greaney. So right out the gate, let me ask you, for a guy who travels a lot between conferences and book research, what's the grind like putting out 2 books a year?
Uh, well, gosh, I don't know how honest to be right now. It was tough last year. I wrote, the Chaos Agent, which was my 13th Gray Man book, and then I, finished that, I wanna say, in late August, and originally had a November due date for Sentinel, and I didn't get it turned in till the end of January, and then immediately I had to promote the Chaos Agent because it came out in February while I was editing. And so now I'm late starting on the 14th Gray Man book. So, the grind is like you're always just sort of behind, and you get a little bit more behind, and we'll get more behind. This year, I'm only writing one book. So when I finish this book in August, I'm going to do some editing on something else, another project. But the second half of my year is going to be a little bit smoother, and that'll benefit me next year.
Well, especially a guy like you travel a lot to do research, and go into conferences. So in between doing all that, I can imagine it's hard to sit down and try and relax and recoup from traveling and then you jump right onto a laptop and get to work. Well, what is traveling like for you and how important is that to ingraining yourself in the story?
I mean, I like to do it. It always helps every project I've ever done to go get some location research when I can. It's not always possible. For this book, Sentinel, I was able to go to West Africa, and I never had been there before. Had a great experience, and did a lot of, like, on the ground research stuff, which I mean, the book really just had to have it. I can't imagine a version of this book that I just pulled out of my head. There was a lot of detail. I don't like going too much into detail, and I don't, attach myself slavishly to the truth all the time. I will make decisions. This doesn't work, or this location doesn't really work the way it really is. Or a lot of times, what happens is I'll go to a place and it's like a lot more complicated if it's a physical space or something. So I'll simplify it for purposes of the story because all I'm trying to do in the story is elicit emotions from the reader. I'm not trying to like create some sort of a training manual. I had a guy send me a nasty email once about a Tom Clancy book I wrote, and it was something about a improvised explosive device, and he said it wouldn't work the way I had it done. And I'm like, I put a lot of detail in there. I was not trying to make a manual on how to build IEDs for a couple of reasons. But the location research, it's fun and it definitely helps the book. So I love doing it.
What's one of your favorite places that you've traveled for research purposes?
Well, I've been to dozens of countries. My absolute favorite research trip was for my fourth Gray Man book. It was called Dead Eye. I just went by myself with a backpack to Estonia, and then up into Stockholm, Sweden, and then into Denmark, and then into Belgium, and then into Germany. And the interesting thing about it was I live in the South. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. And if we get 3 inches of snow, people the cannibalism will break out. It's just like we don't get stuff like that. And I was there in December and there was a blizzard in Stockholm. It was literally like one of the coolest days of my life because I just hadn't been around stuff like that. And Estonia was very, very cool. I'd been to Russia previously, but I hadn't spent a ton of time in Central Europe. So, I always look back at that trip with like incredible fondness. But this trip for Sentinel, I went to Ghana, West Africa, and spent time at the U.S. Embassy, and just really had a good experience there as well.
Yeah, so I lived in Texas while on active duty, and when we got a little bit of rain or snow or ice, like just we're talking a minute amount, 10 minutes of rain or anything like that, people forgot how to drive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Chaos. And I live in northern Oklahoma, so we get Texas heat and Kansas northern weather. So
Yeah, a lot of rain. Yeah.
a lot of rain. People generally know how to drive in adverse conditions. But when I moved to Colorado and I lived there for like a year, and when it snowed there, people just went on with their lives. Nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like
It
I wouldn't drive in it. Like 6 inches of snow, I'm like, I'm not getting out in this. People would like it didn't
yeah.
affect anything.
Yeah, when I was in Stockholm in a blizzard, there was 12 inches in just several hours, and I had to get on a train early the next morning. And I remember getting up like 4 hours early because I'm like, it's going to be really hard to get to the train station, and everything's going to be delayed. And I woke up and all the streets were perfectly clean. A foot of snow was gone, and they know how to handle stuff like that.
So Sentinel focuses a big part about Sentinel is this dam. And how did you decide that the dam was going to be kind of the centerpiece right there in the middle of the book where all the big action is going to take place?
Yeah, it's called the Akosombo Dam. It's, I think, the largest hydroelectric plant in Africa, and it's a couple hours north of Ghana. And as I was researching, I made the decision to put the book in Ghana for a bunch of reasons that had to do with the character and it had to do with the actual geopolitical situation in West Africa and the what they call the coup belt, and Ghana is adjacent to that and considered a stable democracy. And for reasons of my, the character, the protagonist, like I wanted him to go to a place that he thought at least was stable because in the last book he went on a suicide mission and managed to survive, and it would just feel really inauthentic to have him go back out and do that again. So I needed this to be different. So yeah, as I was looking at the country, I was picturing he works for the State Department, my hero Josh Duffy, and he's a diplomatic security officer. And so I pictured this kind of press junket across the country, hitting a lot of stops. And so I was just looking at different cities and different landmarks and things like that around Ghana. And the Akosombo Dam is this huge hydroelectric dam built in the early '60s that needs some upgrading. So I'm having the Americans and Europeans, working on a project to upgrade it, and the Chinese who are very much infiltrating that region don't really like it. So everything kind of fell together to where this hydroelectric dam, a couple hours north of the city. I also knew I could probably get up there and see it, which was another helpful thing.
So you saw the dam.
Yeah, I went to the dam. I didn't go inside. I went into and around. It's on the Volta River and the Lake Volta, and I spent the day in that region and definitely put eyes on the dam and went inside the what's called the Volta River Authority, the property, but I didn't go inside the dam. And honestly, that's just as well. It would have taken a lot of time, and it's really hard to describe. As I was saying earlier, these three-dimensional spaces and hydroelectric dams are really complicated. So I simplified it for purposes of this story. I looked at a lot of blueprints of dams, and I'm like, okay, this I can use. This is just going to confuse readers, and I tried to craft something that was very in depth, but not overly complicated.
So you mentioned something that I want to get into, but first I want to say myself and Ryan Steck are doing some collaborations with the Real Book Spy and coverage of some of these thrillers. And Ryan wanted to be here today to actually kind of crash the party and ask you some questions. His Out for Blood stuff's gotten him really hooked up. So he's been a busy guy. He
Yeah.
shot me some questions this morning. So one of them was you mentioned it about Josh Duffy, kind of don't want him to be the same guy. What is the real difference between him and Court Gentry, the Gray Man, and how do you kind of delineate the two?
Well, when I first got the idea to write the first book in the series, which was called Armored, about a civilian military contractor named Josh Duffy, I knew I wanted him to be very different from Gray Man because when I started writing it, it was a very long time ago, but I had probably 5 Gray Man books out. It's right when I was working with the Tom Clancy books as well. So I wanted somebody that was different. Jack Ryan is all American and trained spy and all that. Uh, Court Gentry has got the paramilitary background and the sort of singleton, non-official cover officer background, and the best guy with a gun ever. I wanted I wanted Josh Duffy to be a blue collar guy, and firearms are tools of his trade, just as if he were a carpenter or a plumber or whatever. But he's not this lofty character. And I wanted to put him in these difficult situations. And he's not really an everyman in the sense of some stories, but he is a guy with with both feet on the ground. And he's trying to make a living for his family, and he's dealing with a bunch of real issues in his life with his family, and so he just feels like a more grounded character than the Gray Man. The Gray Man is fun to try and make him grounded and try and make him relatable, but he also has these like incredible abilities. Whereas Josh Duffy is just a guy who's a really good bodyguard.
And I think that's where the uniqueness comes in. So for the gray man, it's hard for him to be Court Gentry. It's hard for him to be grounded because of the
Yeah.
life, and he wants those opportunities to have that, just relax, especially in the last one. It seems like that's really what he wanted. He wanted to kind of just get back to, look, can we just be us for a minute? And
Yeah.
then Josh Duffy is, we're being us right now, especially in this one. There's a lot more family into it. And then
Mhm.
he kind of gets put into the chaos and it kind of changes things up. I love that he's a little more relatable. Where do you see kind of the future of him going? I know you said you're not doing 2 books a year next year, but where's the Armored series gonna go?
I have some ideas. I think we're going to wait and see how this one sells. The first one hit the Times list, so that's great. We have high hopes for this one, and I would like to do more. I have, people like the same but different. So people want, a similar story but different. I would say Sentinel and Armored are very, very different stories by nature of the career that the hero has. And as you said, there's more family in this one. It was a center point of the first book, and that was his objective, to provide for his family, and his wife, Nicole, was very involved in the action in the first book. But in this one, I wanted to have them all sort of smack in the middle of this, African coup that's taking place. So the kids and Nicole are huge parts of the story. I would want to continue that, and I would want to keep him as a State Department, security guy. There's a special, I've forgotten the name. It's been a while since I wrote the book, but there's a unit in diplomatic security that provides another level of security to high threat targets, and I could have him go there. And I've always thought about having his wife, who's a political officer for state, taking on another role, and then maybe make her a little bit more.
Okay, okay. I got another question from Ryan Stack, the Real Book Spy. He said, not too long ago, you were on Thriller Talk. You mentioned something about working on other projects, and he joked around it couldn't be a romance novel, and you actually said, you know what, actually, yeah, it might be. Is there any development on a romance novel or something like that with you?
I have an idea for a romantic suspense novel that I would want to do, but, I'm contracted to write other stuff. There's other stuff in the pipeline. So it's this thing that I think I'm just gonna pick at and pick at. It's kind of like Armor, the first book in this series. I spent years with that thing sort of in production in the background, and so I'm kind of doing that with this book idea that I have. And I might write another standalone novel before I do that. I've got some other ideas, and there's some interest from the publisher. So, I've one problem I don't have is, like, what am I going to write? So, these are all ideas that I would like to someday realize.
How important is it to you as a writer, as an established writer, to write, to kind of get those feelers and feel outside the genre? We're talking about a romance novel, or even doing more of a romantic arc. How important is it to you as a writer to kind of dabble in that?
Well, dabbling in other genres is something that I haven't really done previously, and I don't know if I'd be good at it. I'd be interested, but I don't know if that would really be in my wheelhouse. But like you just asked, I do like to expand the romantic arc, in a gray man novel. I would like to do a gray man novel that's almost a horror, book, so the other genres as a piece of something that's in the espionage field, which is where I feel comfortable, I think would be doable for me. I don't know that I'm going to go write like, a young adult fantasy or something like that. Hopefully, probably not going to happen.
I think I know, like, you look at a lot of different like, I just read Michael Crichton's Eruption, and it was fantastic. And it makes you just go, as a writer, you kind of go, what else could I do? What are other elements can you add into a story to not only help it kind of change things up, but to expand your abilities? And I think stuff like that is important to look at. It's important to read and take those, things into consideration. Because again, you want to write some of those different elements in there, even if you're sticking with the normal storyline. Court Gentry does have a love interest, and he does have those emotions in there. How do you write that? And I think that's really important to do. How do you kind of keep things dynamic? You're on agreement 14 now.
Yeah, I'm working on 14. Yeah.
How do you keep things dynamic like that?
Yeah, so I think about it a lot. I never want it to feel like a one note story as far as like he's a tough guy out for revenge, and that's page one, and that's page 100 and 200 and 300 and 400, and then he gets his revenge at the end. I like there to be a lot more, moments of lightness and dark. So I like to put, humor in the book. I like to put things in the book that are just, you know, reality doesn't make sense the way that fiction has to, but I like to have kind of elements of things that are very realistic. And I study the geopolitics of the things that I write about, and I'm fascinated with that. So I really I pull from the real world a lot. I mean, maybe even more than some other writers in my genre, and build things out of what's really happened, and or what's on the horizon. And I think that keeps the stories dynamic, but it's something I always think about. And when I'm reading, when I'm kind of editing my own work, I go like, all right, this, here we are 2/5 through the book. It's the hardest part of a book to write is like the second fifth for me somehow. We've got the big setup in the intro, and now how do you keep the action level, where you want it, and put the exposition in there, but not make it look like you're, doing some kind of an info dump. And so when I go back and read that stuff, I go like, all right, is this too dry? Is this too silly? Or is this the tone's not right for the book? So I'm always thinking about stuff like that. I probably never hit the nail on the head exactly the way I want to, but like being aware of that can keep the stories kind of more dynamic, hopefully.
Speaking of grounded in reality, you take a lot of nonfiction and move it into fiction, as you said. The Chaos Agent. I know we're talking about Sentinel today, but the Chaos Agent came out earlier this year. That was very grounded in reality to a point where I think some people were like, "No way, this is real. No way, he's talking realism." How real was the Chaos Agent? What kind of research did you do to kind of put that together?
Well, I did a ton of research, and I'll start by saying I've gotten all those emails from people who say, "You've jumped the shark with this Star Wars crap," and I just roll my eyes. I'm just like, "You're just sort of like telling me I'm ignorant about this subject, and so I don't like what you've written." And it doesn't even come off like I don't even get mad about it. I'm like, "Oh, okay, so you don't know what you're talking about. So whatever criticism you have here, it just rolls off me." But I did. I read a lot of books. I did a ton of research, listened to literally hundreds of hours of podcasts, read think tank papers. I read a lot of like government publications and think tank publications, kind of about the ethics of weaponized artificial intelligence and obviously the technology where we are. And there was nothing in the book that you know wasn't already happening, or a version of it wasn't being worked on. So I wanted to keep that book grounded. And Sentinel, this is a book about a coup in Africa, in the African coup belt, where they've had 8 coups in the past 3 years, two in Burkina Faso, I think, and then everywhere along this African coup belt. And Ghana is considered the most stable democracy in Africa, which is a relative term, but it is a pretty stable democracy. But that's what I wanted. I wanted a place that was near where this was all going on, so I could write about, the how outside influence could kind of foment a coup. So it was all taken from real. There's a scene in the opening of Sentinel where um, the hero Josh is out in front of the Turkish embassy when a protest breaks out, and the Turkish bodyguards, the president's bodyguards, immediately start going out and beating up protesters. And that actually happened in 2017, almost the exact same thing the way I wrote it. And I just put a diplomatic security officer there trying to get the daughter of a European foreign minister, out of harm's way. So I really like to keep the books as grounded as possible because I think my mind is fertile. I can take a real situation and then fictionalize that much better than I can just pull something out. If I had to write science fiction or something like that, I'd be terrible.
Well, I'm sure you'd dig in and do your research as you do in these, and it would be just fine. I think you'd be incredible at anything you wrote. But you've traveled to on your press kit. It says over 35 different countries. You've done a ton of different research, from field research, firearms research, medical research. What's been some of the best experiences that has really lended to your writing when it comes to doing all this different training and getting your hands in there?
Well, the number one thing that's helped me research wise is the firearms training, and honestly, not because now I'm like a ninja with guns. It's not that at all. It's that, I've spent a lot of time in the team rooms and bunkhouses at firearm schools with like active duty military or law enforcement guys, SWAT guys, or civilian contractors. And, I just feed off of that. And then I just made connections from that. And I know a guy who knows a guy. And so when it's time to go to an Air Force base or something, I know who to reach out to. Probably the most fun thing that I've done, not probably, definitely the most fun thing that I've gotten to do for research, was I got to fly in an F-18, U.S. Navy F-18. Jack Stewart, who's another author, was an active, or yeah, was in the reserve, and he flew me down to New Orleans, and it wasn't lost on me that I was very lucky to be given this opportunity. But yeah, I got to go to a lot of the three-letter intelligence agencies, and as I said, I got to go to some embassies and do things like that. And it's all great for the story, but it's also this thing where you just feel really lucky that you're able to get to take part in these things.
Well, and again, we're talking grounded in realism, in reality, and it's a double edged sword because again, you get plenty of emails saying, "Oh no, that's not true," or "Oh, that wouldn't happen," and people tend to forget it's fiction that is grounded in reality to give it a sense of realism, and people start to take it as fact. But having that experience is huge. Again, you got to ride in a F-18 with Jack Stewart. Shout out to Jack Stewart and his Battleborn books, which are incredible. But what was it like flying in F-18? How did that experience kind of humble you as to what the Navy is really capable of?
Well, I've done a bunch of things with the military in the past, never anything like this. I had to go up to Maryland for well, first I had to get medically cleared to do it, and I'm 56 years old. I guess I was 54 at the time, and so that was a kind of a process, kind of prove you're not going to die at 20,000 feet or whatever. And then I had to go to Maryland to do the water survival course that the Navy offers, and, I actually trained for that for months and months, and then I went there, and it was really not that big of a deal. It wasn't. I was so paranoid about how I was gonna do. I bought, like, like a full jumpsuit and combat boots and, like, had a bike helmet, and I was, like, swimming in my pool all summer, like, all the time, and, I think I might have been able to just kind of, like, walk in off the street and pass it, but it was actually very interesting because I learned a ton of stuff. They spend an hour or 2 hours talking to you about what to do if you have to eject, and the whole time I'm sitting there going, I'm just gonna sit there and hope for the best because it's really hard. They're telling you how to like, clear the parachute lines and all these things if you have problems. And I'm sitting there going, the chance that I'm gonna have my wits about me at that moment is not that great. So I'm just going to do my best. But then after that, I got to go down to New Orleans and met Jack the night before, and that morning we went and we were part of a 4-ship flight, and we were the only ones that didn't actually have cannon or didn't have, weapons on board or ammunition on board because of a rule about having a civilian, um, but the other guys were doing gun runs outside of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and, firing at targets and coordinating with ground forces, and, we got to sort of, like, fly along with them, and we got to do 6.5 Gs and everything. And they packed me with 4 barf bags right here in my vest before it started, and I didn't use them. I was very proud of that. I was very worried I was going to black out or I was gonna throw up, and, fortunately, none of that happened.
I think that'd be my biggest worry is, am I going to embarrass myself?
That's all I was worried about. It's this ridiculous peer pressure thing, and, I was literally in the air thinking about the 19-year-old guy back at home that's gonna have to clean or, back on the ground that's gonna have to clean out the cockpit if this idiot throws up in it. So, I was being empathetic and
What were the G's like? Feeling that for like the very first time, that real weight and what a fighter pilot feels all the time.
yeah, so we go up in the air. Well, first off, when I got medically cleared, they said they didn't want me doing, too many Gs, and I think that's kind of a vague term. And as soon as we got in the air, Jack said, "Okay, let's test out the Gs. We're going to start with 6.5." And I was thinking, why don't we start with 2? I don't understand why we're starting with 6.5. And so, yeah, that first, I'm embarrassed to say this, but it's funny, and I might as well be honest. The first time we did this big roll spin thing, I shut my eyes because it's just kind of natural. You're falling through the sky and you're being pulled in every direction on all your harnesses. And then when we leveled off, I remember thinking, okay, don't shut your eyes because that was terrifying. And after that, I left my eyes open and it was much better. So if you ever find yourself in that situation, just go ahead and keep your eyes open, ride it out like a man. But after that, it was a lot of fun. I kind of joked that it was a 90-minute flight, and there was about 15 minutes where I really did not want to be on that airplane. But the rest of the time, it was like the coolest thing that ever happened to me, and that's what you remember.
I talked to another author, and he told me that the F-18s are actually designed to land really hard, and I was surprised by that. I've been around the Air Force for a long time. They have really nice landings where they just touch the ground, and it's
Yeah,
very beautiful. And then you see a F-18 land on a aircraft carrier or on a regular runway, and they just boom, they just really hit the ground. And he said it's designed like that. They're
yeah,
not designed to land soft. They're designed to land with authority, and it's a huge difference. And it really kind of puts it in perspective how different the different branches are when it comes to flying and their requirements and what all they do.
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that I think it's cool that you got a guy to fly with Jack, and of course Jack's books are doing great now. And his first book was fantastic when it came to the detail of flying in the cockpit. And
yeah. Yeah, no, he's terrific, and he's a great pilot. He flies for Southwest, but as we were coming in over the airfield, he's like, "All right, we're going to just kind of fly over the runway, and then I'm gonna pull like 4.5 Gs, and we're gonna do a big circle and come back around and land." And I have the whole thing videoed. And it was just really, really cool. You're just a few hundred feet above the ground, and you're completely, horizontal or whatever, vertical, whatever. You're on your side. It was just really, really a fun experience.
let's talk about something that I don't think gets brought up that often, is that you have some pretty deep family ties when it comes to your dad and the newsroom. And he worked his way up from a cameraman all the way up to a managing editor. And you have a lot of news experience because that was often at the dinner table. What's your relationship like with your dad, and how did it kind of influence how you went into the geopolitical and into your writing?
Yeah, I kind of uh, give my dad credit for everything because he was a combat veteran in the Second World War, and when I was very young, um, I was interested in that sort of thing. He fought in Germany and was actually in the Philippines about to be involved in the invasion of Japan when the war ended. So I think he did some police action stuff in the Philippines for a few months, but the war was kind of officially over, but not all the Japanese knew that those first few months afterwards. So he came back home to Memphis and he started working at a TV station. And he actually became the assistant general manager of news and public affairs. So he's the head of the news department for a very, very long time. And then when he officially retired in 1989, he retired on a Friday. And the following Monday, he went back to work as a producer doing like the AM show. So he was going, he's in his 70s going to work, at 4 something in the morning to do a morning show because he really loved it and that's what he liked to do. And so, you know, sitting at the breakfast table talking about politics and, international affairs and government and military and things like that is just how I grew up. My brothers as well, but I think I was like more obsessed about that. They all have other interests, but that's what I did. Unfortunately, my dad passed away before I ever got published, and he gave me my first Tom Clancy book. Well, actually, no, I bought my first Tom Clancy book, but once he knew I liked Tom Clancy, he would buy it for me for Christmas. And so he was a big reader, and he was a very curious guy, I guess, like I am. So I feel like he's number one in my influences for how I turned out.
I think that's really cool that you have a good relationship with him and then dating back to, kind of what he did in the newsroom and how it's kind of influenced you. And of course, a lot of people exchange Tom Clancy books for Christmas. That seemed to be the thing for the longest time.
Yeah,
If you got a Clancy book for Christmas, that was like the thing. People were like, I
yeah,
got the new Clancy book for Christmas. It was a
yeah.
really, really big deal back then. And what is it like now having kind of the expanded family? I know you got a couple of stepkids, correct?
I have 3. Yeah, yeah.
Well, it went from none to 3 kind of overnight.
Exactly.
What's it like
Yeah.
having an expanded family?
I went from single to married, from 2 dogs to 4 dogs, and from 0 kids to 3 kids, and it all happened over COVID, so, it was kind of everybody moves in together. We just gotten engaged and in the end of January, and then COVID started in March of 2020, and we got married in the fall of 2020, and, the kids are great. I've got one who's in college in California, and she's also a musician, and I have a, 16-year-old stepdaughter and an almost 15-year-old stepson, and, they've been away at camp for a couple weeks, so, I'll see one of them today and the other one on Friday, but it's, as far as your work life, it changes everything, like, everything is changed because I used to the only thing vying for my time in the old days was an Xbox or, you know, just just sitting around watching TV, watching soccer or something. And now I always say if there's 35 things going on in this house, Mark's writing career is number 35 on the priority list. And that's just kind of the way it is. I still get the books done somehow, and I'm still happy with how they turn out. But yeah, it's just like I mean, not to get in too much detail, but about an hour ago, I was back here working, and I get a text that the one of the dogs pooped in the house because he's old, and so it's like close your laptop off, go in there, clean that up, come back when you can, and it's kind of all day. Having kids, try to explain it to my buddy who's about my age and hasn't had kids. I'm like, y- you're never more than 5 seconds away from whatever your plans are being completely changed, Yeah, I don't know if you have kids, but, it's like anytime the phone rings, anytime a text dings or whatever, it's like you might be on your way to the hospital or you might be on your way to wherever, it's like that all the time, but it's a lot of
Yeah, I have 4. My oldest is out of the house serving in the Air Force, and then I have 3
Oh,
here
terrific.
that are all in high school. So I got all high school age now.
Yeah,
But we got 4 dogs too. We added a pool, to the house this year. We got 4 dogs. The kids are all involved in something, and some of them are involved in multiple things. So just
yeah,
trying to balance. I'm trying to write, I'm doing the podcast, and then they have things, and then I got to check on the pool every day because if you don't, it turns green on you overnight. Like it's
yeah,
trying to punish you. And
yeah.
it's like, man, when we added the 4th dog is when I really questioned my decision making. And I said, what am I tormenting myself? I love the dog. I mean, it's a little French bulldog
Yeah,
and I love her. But it really made me go, I'm just a glutton for punishment because it is, like you said, you are 5 seconds away from your plans being changed or things getting thrown into a whirlwind. And enjoyable, but at the same time, it makes life
yeah,
kind of chaotic. I
it
got
does.
one more question from the book Spy, from Ryan Stack that I want to ask you, and he wants to know: are there any updates on the next Gray Man film?
Really, no. I know that there's a script that's been written, and I've read something that Joe Russo had said recently that they're kind of like working on the direction they want to go with that script. So I don't know if there's going to be more changes to it, or if they're, you know, interested in changing the tone or something like that. So it was kind of vague. The first movie, I found out they were actually making it. I'd heard a lot of rumors, but I'd been hearing rumors for a dozen years at that point. And but I found out it was going to be made when there was an article in Deadline and Variety, and when it public. I didn't know in advance, and I imagine that'll be the same with this one, and that's fine. But yeah, I wish I knew something a little bit more. I do know that it's in the works, and hopefully they'll make some kind of an announcement pretty soon.
Do I remember right? Were the Armored novels in talks to do something on TV or film?
Yeah, so the first book in the Josh Duffy series, Sentinel is the new book, was optioned by Lionsgate TV, so they have it right now, and I'm hoping they develop it. Even though I've had something that was made into a film, it doesn't make me feel like, oh yeah, it's a sure thing, because that was never a sure thing. It was always a one in a million shot. So I kind of joke that now I have a two in a million shot. So I'm doing pretty good, but it's still a long shot. But I hope something comes out of it.
Yeah, because the Gray Man, the story behind that, we've talked about it before, but I mean, it got moved around and different rumors and different decisions, and before it finally kind of landed into Russo's laps and started becoming reality, it took a long time to get there. People don't
Yeah,
realize how long it takes
yeah,
to do that. Just because the rights get sold and somebody has them
yeah.
doesn't mean the next day they're in the writer's room working on it. It just means
No,
it's on a schedule somewhere to be worked on, and it could be years down the road. And people
yeah.
people think you sell it, and it turns into a movie tomorrow, and that's not the truth.
Yeah, it spent years on a shelf, and, I think there were 5 different scripts or 4 different scripts written. At one point, they changed the lead to a female because Charlize Theron wanted to do it, and so, Sony changed it to a female, and I read the script and I thought, "Hey, this is a great script. This would make a great movie," but it doesn't really have much to do with my book, so I don't really understand why, they would do that, but, they have their own logic out there in Hollywood, and things move at their own speed. I initially sold the rights to Gray Man in 2009, and it showed up on screens in 2022, and I'm still very, very lucky. It took 13, 14 years, and I'm still really, really lucky.
So what's next for Mark Greaney? You said you're kind of going to do some editing soon this fall.
Yeah.
Can you tease us about some of those other projects a little bit without giving too much away?
Yeah, yeah. So right now I'm writing the 14th Gray Man book. It's called Midnight Black, and it'll be out next February. It's due in August, so I will have that turned in sometime in August. I'm doing press for Sentinel right now, and then I've got a big family trip, and after that, it's just going to be sort of buckle down, lock myself up somewhere and finish that. And once that's over, I'm going to do. I said editing. It's more than editing, but it's less than writing a book, out of nothing. Going to work on the second book in my Red Metal series. My co-author Rip Rawlings is working on it now, and I think sometime in the fall he's going to give me some pages, and then I'm going to start working on it. And I, we don't have like a firm due date of when that is going to come out. So I'm going to kind of work at it at a easier pace than I normally do, but it's a project I'm really excited about. So it'll be fun. It's the kind of work where you don't feel as burdened by it. You're really fascinated with it, and when you don't have a deadline looming over you like an axe, it feels a little bit more comfortable.
So we'll get another Gray Man next year, and then you said you had Red Metal, no firm date for that. A third armored book potentially in the future.
Hopefully.
Does it look like you'll continue to try to do 2 books a year, or do you think maybe you go back and forth, in the future?
Well, I said all last year when I was writing 2 books that I would never write 2 books a year again, but there's just, there's some opportunities for stuff that's like, I wanna do it, and when could I do it if I don't do 2 books a year? I'd have to wait for 3 years because the Gray Man books are gonna keep coming out. That doesn't mean there'll be one every year, but they'll keep coming out. So, I'm not 100% sure. I have an idea for another standalone novel that I'll probably work on sometime. I really don't know my schedule. This is Sentinel is my 25th published novel, and it's just inevitable that you have to slow down some because it's really hard to come up with new stuff. When you've written 24 other things, and you're writing your 25th thing. I'm writing my 26th now. To keep it fresh, you probably need to slow that pace down a little bit. But I do have a few good ideas, so we'll see how it shakes out.
Well, Mark, thank you again for coming on, carving out the time and doing this. I really appreciate it. Where can they go to kind of find more about you and the future projects?
Well, my website is my name, Mark Greaney, Greaney books.com. And that has all the info on me. I'm all over social media. So, I hope people can reach out to me there. I'd love to expand my social media a little bit. So, yeah, I'm out there. I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thanks again, man. You're going to be at VoucherCon this year?
Yeah, I'm going to be in Nashville at VoucherCon. I live in Memphis. It's a 3 hour drive, and it's a no brainer. I always have a good time at VoucherCon, so it'll be fun.
I'm going to go, so I'll definitely swing by
Good.
and say hi and
Awesome.
we'll chat. But again, thanks for coming on, and I'll make sure we got the file, and then I'll let you go.